This is Daywatch on CNN for Friday, June 6th.
Space Shuttle its report to President Reagan today. It is going to be made public on Monday. The Rogers Commission report indicates only 2.5 hours into the investigation, the Commission found a smoking gun. An engineer for the rocket builder Morton Thiokol told the panel then that some people had opposed the shuttle's launch on January 28th. That testimony from Alan McDonald, the first indication to the Commission that there had been protests before the Challenger left the ground. The Commission later found there was concern that shuttle booster rocket seals might not work in cold weather.
Good evening. Here's what's happening. The report on the space shuttle disaster is now in President Reagan's hands, and the public will get a look at it on Monday. Tonight, CNN's John Holloman reports some hard-fought battles among members of the investigative commission that wrote the report. One member was harshly critical of NASA, and therein lies the tale that John Holloman unfolds now from Washington.
Commission member Richard Feynman charged that NASA had virtually ignored the principles of physics and good scientific practice in designing, testing, and building the space shuttle. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist wrote a section of the final report known as Chapter F. Commission sources say Chairman William Rogers read the chapter and was furious. He called Feynman to Washington Wednesday and urged him to tone down his criticism of NASA because Chapter F threatened to destroy public confidence in the space agency. Feynman returned to his home in California and began his rewrite, but then changed his mind. Sources close to the scientist say he felt his ethics were being compromised. He sent a message to Rogers threatening to resign from the commission and demanding his name be taken off the final report if his chapter was not included in its entirety. After a day of tense negotiation, Feynman agreed to stay on the commission and sign the final document.
But the result of all this is that President Reagan will not read Dr. Feynman's criticism this weekend at Camp David. His chapter will be printed and released as part of the lengthy appendix to the report. At the White House, a senior administration official says there's still no consensus on a fourth shuttle orbiter, but CNN has learned the president does support the plan to replace Challenger. The senior official says if the fourth orbiter is approved, the president will ask Congress to appropriate money to build it rather than take money from current NASA programs. John Holloman, CNN, Washington.
The members of the House Committee on Science and Technology will help decide where NASA's manned space program goes in the aftermath of the Challenger disaster. Committee members now say they want to concentrate on correcting NASA's problems and getting back into space. They promise in the future NASA will be more closely watched by Congress.
I think that we have been too cozy as a committee with NASA over the years. We never really questioned what it is that they were doing. Whatever NASA wants, NASA gets.
The question was asked earlier, will we be much, what would you say, more vigorous in our oversight and our attention to every detail? The answer is yes, we will.
It will be this group of lawmakers who help decide if NASA will be allowed to build a replacement orbiter for the lost Challenger. There's growing indication the space agency is going to come under intense congressional criticism over the Challenger accident.
So the policy is really going to be based on what does Congress decide to do in its priorities and providing the funding to put America back on course in the basic leadership.
This is Daybreak for Monday, June 9th, 1986.
Good morning. The Presidential Commission's report on the shuttle tragedy will be released to the public this afternoon. The President has had a copy of it since Friday, and the public nature of the Commission's inquiry has already revealed the general thrust of it: faulty rocket design and faulty communications up the line. The focus today is on the White House, which commissioned the inquiry, and CNN's Frances Harden is there. Good morning, Frances.
Good morning, Reed. It's just as you say, because the Rogers Commission pretty much conducted its investigation in the public eye, very few surprises are expected here at the White House this afternoon when the commission headed by former Secretary of State William Rogers was charged with finding out what caused the shuttle to explode. In addition to problems with the hardware, it also uncovered human errors at NASA. Sources say the commission report will recommend structural changes at NASA, new rocket design and testing procedures, as well as increased attention to safety with the formation of an independent safety panel. The commissioners concluded that a leak in the seal between two segments of a solid rocket booster led to the explosion. They also discovered that contractor engineers were opposed to the launch, but the top NASA officials were never informed of those objections. Former astronaut John Glenn says that is one indication of the NASA mystique gone astray.
I think that can-do attitude, perhaps at least with some people in NASA, not everyone, because most of the NASA people are just as dedicated as they've ever been. But at least with some of the people in there, that can-do attitude was replaced by a can't-fail attitude.
Final thing, while the Rogers Commission inquiry may prove to be the definitive report on the subject, it certainly will not be the last. There are already plans for congressional hearings on why the shuttle exploded. Frances Harden, CNN, live at the White House.
And one member of the Rogers Commission is going to have his own study and his own views of the Challenger disaster published in some voluminous appendixes, which will come out at a later date. This one promises to be somewhat more harsh in its evaluation of the space agency than the general commission report being made public today. Sources close to the panel say the Nobel physicist Richard Feynman had concluded that the chances of a catastrophic shuttle accident were far greater than NASA had predicted before the Challenger disaster did happen. Dr. Feynman, you may remember, was one of the more skeptical members of the Rogers Commission. He had asked some of the tougher questions of the NASA witnesses. In fact, he had threatened not to sign the final report out today because it was, he thought, not tough enough. Later, however, Professor Feynman reached an agreement with William Rogers on the report's language, and he signed the report being made public today. Good morning. In the shock and the disbelief that followed destruction of the Challenger January 28th, President Reagan named a blue-ribbon panel of experts to conduct an independent inquiry into the accident. The commission, headed by the former Secretary of State William Rogers, releases its findings today. As CNN's Tom Montier reports, the space agency can expect harsh criticism.
William Rogers in February.
I certainly think NASA has done an excellent thing people do.
The chairman of the commission investigating the Challenger disaster stepped away from his endorsement of the U.S. Space Agency very quickly.
Decision-making process is such that the prime contractor thinks he objected and testified under oath that they took a position it was unsafe to launch, and you say that was not our understanding. That shows us sitting in the process.
What started out as a tension between NASA and the Presidential Commission quickly became one-sided. It was obvious during the hearings that NASA had become the target. Perhaps the can't-fail mentality is the most damaging. Commission sources say the Challenger accident was preventable if NASA management had listened to some of its engineers. The solid rocket boosters that will be listed as the cause of the accident had a track record of problems. A record that was... The booster rocket joints had been a concern since the 1970s, long before the first shuttle was even launched in 1981. The commission uncovered evidence that in nearly half of the previous 24 flights, the O-ring seals did not work properly. The final report will demand that the rocket be redesigned and that all testing be conducted full-scale, not with 10-inch models. The recommendation will be that the test be conducted as the rockets would be used, in an upright position, a major. If implemented, that could push back the shuttle launch for an additional 12 months. The recommendation by a presidential commission that NASA may attempt a quick fix to get the space program moving again.
We have to make a system that is more forgiving than the one we've been flying. And I think we can do that.
James Kingsbury is the Director of Science and Engineering at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, a center that will soon be under new leadership. William Lucas last week became the highest-ranking NASA official to leave the program before the presidential report was filed. It is here at Marshall that engineers are searching for a safer design for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters.
Sun up to sundown, 7 days a week, they're out here working hard. And that is not an indicator of lousy morale. That's an indicator of great motivation.
The investigation is now over. The space agency has been turned inside out in a way no one ever expected. What remains to be seen is how well NASA recovers. What went wrong with the program did not occur overnight. Fixing it won't either. Tom Montier, CNN.
CNN's Frances Harden is with us now, live from the White House, for the president's expected reaction to this pending release of his commission's findings. Frances?
Reed, the president is expected to endorse the findings of the Shuttle Commission. Aides say he spent much of the weekend at Camp David studying the report. Former Secretary of State William Rogers, who headed the commission, the Shuttle Commission, will meet with the president shortly after 1 o'clock this afternoon and then make a few remarks to reporters in the Rose Garden. While the Rogers Commission investigation may prove to be the definitive study of what went wrong with the shuttle, it certainly will not be the last. Congressional hearings on the subject are already scheduled. Frances Harden, CNN, live at the White House.
Good morning. The Presidential Challenger Commission's report becomes public today after the panel's chief, William Rogers, goes to the White House and presents it formally to the President. Reporters were on hand this morning getting their copies of the report, even though the details are embargoed until after Rogers has met with Mr. Reagan. However, many of the Commission's findings and recommendations already are known because it conducted its investigation in such an open manner. CNN's John Holloman joins us now with more on this story. Good morning, John. You covered a lot of the Commission's work, both public and private, and what can you tell us about the report?
Well, Reed, there are two basic recommendations: fix the shuttle, fix NASA. And to the first of those, the joint in the solid rocket booster which failed, causing the accident, has to be fixed to make it just as strong as the rest of the booster casing. And other safety problems with the shuttle, including a weak braking system, have to be redesigned. At the outset of its probe, the panel was willing to give NASA the benefit of the doubt, but in the course of hearing from NASA and contractor engineers, that changed dramatically.
Any information that you have?
Barometer. None of the readings as you move around the...
There are potentially some rain showers or even some thunder showers.
Position where the space shuttle would have been any previous launch. Is that correct? Maybe it was Mr. Stevens.
Launch. And so, as far as launch?
We would hook the equipment on pad A, but had not been installed as this flight is concerned.
No, sir.
The report recommends that NASA tighten its grip on the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama because officials at Marshall failed to pass on to higher-ups objections to the launch from Morton Thiokol engineers. NASA is already reviewing all parts of the shuttle which could cause an accident if they fail, and is reorganizing its safety organization to give astronauts a greater role in safety programs. This commission is being given high marks for the work it's done. It met formally more than 35 times, interviewed more than 160 people, and gathered 1,000 pages of evidence. The report, which President Reagan started reading over the weekend, is the first of 5 volumes. The others will be released over the next several weeks and will include more detail on what went wrong and why.
John, I'm wondering, does the report come down on one specific issue? Does it find one probable cause, as it was charged with finding a couple of months ago?
Well, actually, it did, Reed. This joint where the two sections of the solid rocket booster go together was obviously flawed. Inside this document, which we cannot open officially until 2 o'clock this afternoon, photographs of the wreckage, which have not been seen before. And those photographs clearly show what happened, this huge, gaping, welded hole in the side of the two boosters. And in conversations with NASA officials, it turns out that a combination of factors, the cold weather, the fact that the O-rings were squeezed too tightly. Instead of being perfectly round, it turned out they were almost oval-shaped as they sat there at 2 points on the side of the boosters. And that's obviously what started the leak and what caused this disaster.
Commission member Dr. Feineman, you remember back at the outset of these public hearings, gave us a little sort of a high school demonstration on the conformity of the O-ring material when he put it into a glass of ice water that just happened to be there. The doctor has been a unique character among the other ones, and I think you covered a story of his having to do with what almost amounted to a dissent at one point from the regular commission's hearing.
Exactly. Reed, it was very interesting. Dr. Feynman has written a section which is not in this document, but will be in the next document that the commission puts out in several weeks, which is stingingly critical of NASA. It says that the people who made the engineering decisions there were either stupid or they were dissembling. And stupid and dissembling is not the sort of word you're going to find in this document. This is a very smooth, very precise, and very bending over backwards almost to be fair to NASA document. What happened with Dr. Feynman is that he wrote his chapter, submitted it to Chairman William Rogers. Rogers looked at it and said, "This is too tough." Said to Feynman, "Go rewrite this, soften it up a little bit." Feynman agreed to do that, went to California, then had second thoughts. He said, "My goodness, I'm compromising my integrity here." He refused to do that. Then he sent a message to Rogers, a telegram, I believe, threatening to quit, and then planning to offer a dissenting report to this report. And as it turned out, he was able to get back on board, and his chapter, as I say, because of this discussion at the last minute, it's not included in this document, but we will look forward to seeing it in the next one.
And that'll be in the appendices that are going to be published later. Thank you, John Holloman. The House Science and Technology Committee starts its review tomorrow of this Challenger Commission report. One of the committee's members, Florida Democrat Bill Nelson, represents the district that includes the Kennedy Space Center. Congressman Nelson chairs the Space Science and Application Subcommittee, and he flew aboard the Columbia shuttle mission in January, the one just before the ill-fated Challenger. Congressman joins us now from the House Gallery, and he'll talk about the expected findings of the report. Welcome, Congressman Nelson, and you may not have seen the report, but do you have a feeling about it? Will it suffice? Will it do to find the probable cause and make the recommendations necessary to get on with the job?
Yes, I think it's a good report. It clearly identifies the problem as a failed joint. And of course, so much of the commission report has already been leaked. We know what those findings are, that there were a series of factors that all acting in concert together caused this failure of the joint. One of your reporters earlier said it was failed hardware and failed NASA. And indeed, there were serious mistakes. While I was down at the Kennedy Space Center last Friday, I learned of one that was rather unusual. This joint has design specifications for being able to operate down to 25 degrees. Yet Thiokol had never tested down to 25 degrees, and NASA had never checked to make sure that they had, and nobody understands why. So those are some of the mistakes that have to be rectified.
Congressman, I'm wondering, on the other side of that coin, is there a danger that in the rush to make everything safe again and secure, that we'll start fixing things that are not broken?
Well, yes, there's always that danger, but you've got to understand that you're starting with a very complicated machine that flies into a hostile environment. And you can't make it risk-free. So you can do the best that you can, and yet the pressing needs of the country, particularly national security needs, that says, come on, let's get it fixed so that we can fly again. And I think you've just got to consider all of those factors as we try to correct everything that we can and then go out and fly.
All right, sir, what's going to be your recommendation, or what would you recommend about safety and exit features of it? It's the only space vehicle flying east or west that has no prospect of escape from tragedy during the initial and most dangerous boost phase. What's going to be done about that?
Well, I don't think, unless we completely redesign the system, that in that first 2 minutes and 8 seconds of the thrust by the solid rocket boosters, that you can have a fail-safe system whereby the crew can get out. Our crew that flew and landed only 10 days before Challenger exploded certainly understood that. You interestingly say the most critical, the ascent, actually the re-entry as you come back through the Earth's atmosphere is one of the most critical and dangerous parts of the mission. And there are just certain risks that are inherent with those aspects of the flight.
Are you suggesting that there may be some built-in risks there that we don't fully understand on re-entry?
There will always be built-in risk with space flight. Space flight is risky business. No, we understand, fortunately, the re-entry risk, but that is that you've got to have just the right angle of attack as you come back through the atmosphere, otherwise you're going to burn up.
Well, this was known. What I was driving at was, do you suspect there may be some inherent flaw in design or procedures that might make that more risky than it inherently is?
No, we don't see any evidence of that.
All right. Given all that we have to do now, how soon do you imagine it is really possible for a shuttle to fly again?
Well, if everything is successful in the testing, the earliest is July of 1987. So it could be later than that. That is assuming that you don't go in and completely redesign the entire boost phase of solid rocket boosters, and that you don't put in all kinds of new escape mechanisms, because that would take an extraordinary amount of time. We need to look at those. The question is, what are the risks that are acceptable? And I think shortly after July of '87, correcting the SRBs, we'll be able to fly.
All right, final question, Congressman. John Young, the chief of the astronauts office and a veteran pilot, wants an escape system, a tractor mechanism, some way to get off right at liftoff, at light up. What if he insists on this? What if this becomes a public matter?
Well, I'm not sure John has insisted on that. I've talked to him, and I didn't understand it. If he were to insist on that, a great deal of weight will come on his comments, because John is one of the most respected people in the aerospace community of this nation. John and Bob Crippen, when they flew the first shuttle flight, had 2 ejection seats. But you couldn't put those ejection seats in for all 7 crew members. So those are the things that are going to have to be looked at.
Congressman Bill Nelson, thank you very much.
It was a bad seal on a rocket booster that caused the Space Shuttle Challenger to explode January 28th. It was a bad management attitude toward safety that failed to find and act on that bad seal. Thus spoke today the Presidential Commission on the shuttle tragedy. Correspondent Elizabeth Brackett has this full report on the commission and its findings.
The President had asked the commission he appointed 120 days ago to find the cause of the Challenger disaster. And today, the commission said they had done that. In clear, concise language, the report states, the cause of the Challenger accident was the failure of the pressure seal due to a faulty design.
We know precisely how this accident occurred. And I think that, I certainly hope that there will be no nagging questions that remain about it. I think every agency that worked with us on this report and all of the people on the commission came to the same conclusion, that this tragic accident was a result of the failure of that joint on the right aft booster rocket.
The commission found that the seals on the right rocket began to fail 1/2 second after liftoff. 1 minute into the launch, a plume of flame emerged from the damaged joint. The plume hit the external fuel tank and the Challenger was destroyed. NASA photos show the crew compartment falling free of the massive fireball, but the report gave no details on how long the astronauts may have survived.
As you probably know, if you followed the investigation, we did not ask questions about that. We thought that that did not really relate to our mandate. We realized there was a lot of public interest in it, but we did not think that was appropriate for us to develop.
After deciding that the failure of the seal had caused the accident, the commission then asked why the seal had failed. The finding? Neither NASA or Morton Thiokol, the contractor, ever fully understood or fully tested the joint sealing action. As a result, the first of the commission's 9 recommendations called for a change in the joint and seal design, thorough testing of the new joint, and a review of the new design by an outside panel of scientists from the National Research Council. But the commission found that the cause of the disaster was not only faulty technology, it was also a faulty decision-making process. Engineers at Morton Thiokol told commissioners in hearings that they had not wanted the Challenger to launch because of their fear that cold weather would cause the seals to fail.
The bottom line was that the engineering people would not recommend the launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit.
But that recommendation never made its way to the top. Instead, the finding of the commission was Thiokol management reversed its position at the urging of NASA managers at the Marshall Space Flight Center in order to accommodate a major customer. That finding led to several recommendations. 1, reorganize and centralize the shuttle management. Involve astronauts in more management decisions. Chairman Rogers said it was not the purpose of the commission to directly blame anyone for the disaster.
So I don't think that anything is to be gained by trying to assess who's to blame. We know what happened. We know it was a tragic event. And now that the report is out and everybody has a chance to look at it and study, we hope that NASA can continue on with a program which has been very successful in the past and will be in the future.
Though the report did not blame individuals for the disaster, it did come down hard on the management at the Marshall Space Flight Center. The report recommended that Marshall improve its communications by changing personnel, changing its organization, or indoctrinating its personnel. The director of the Marshall Space Flight Center has already announced his early retirement, and Chairman Rogers hinted today that more changes will follow.
I think that NASA's recent decisions have been constructive. I had a little discussion this morning with Jim Fletcher and Admiral Truly. I think they're quite aware of the needs for management changes. I think they're quite aware of the need for restructuring some aspects of management, and I have confidence that they'll do that.
The Commission blamed the faulty decision-making on another problem, the pressure to launch. As a result, the Commission recommended that a flight rate be established that is consistent with NASA resources.
When you set out with a schedule and you, whatever it was, 24 launches a year, and then you try to live up to the schedule, you have self-imposed pressures. When you realize that you're falling behind the schedule, you can't meet it, then it becomes very difficult, and we have attempted in our report to point that out. So we would urge NASA not to be too optimistic about the launch schedule, to do it on a realistic basis, and I think they will.
There was to be a 10th recommendation in the report, but after objections to the tone and scope of that recommendation by the Nobel laureate on the panel, Dr. Richard Feynman, the recommendation turned into a concluding thought. That concluding thought urges the administration and the nation to continue to support NASA.
Late this afternoon, NASA had a chance to respond to the Commission's report. NASA's new chief, James Fletcher, spoke at a news conference.
We are going to behave like a family which has suffered a tragic event. We are going to deal responsibly with our loss without needless recrimination, and we are going to move forward facing and conquering the challenges that face us. Where management is weak, we will strengthen it. Where engineering or design or process need improving, we will improve them. Where our internal communications are poor, we will see that they get better.
I'm wondering if you could assess for us the morale damage done here at NASA, how much damage control you might have to do, and what effect you think it may have on future flights, including getting the launch off that you hope you can get off next summer.
Well, I've heard a lot of talk about the morale question, and I would rather call it a motivation and dedication question. We can't really make this shuttle operational, if you like, or fly again is a better word, without the motivation and dedication of a large number of NASA workers and contractors' efforts. All of them have to be rededicated, as I indicated.
You said that the shuttle is an R&D vehicle and will remain so for some years. Would you anticipate flying citizens on an R&D vehicle?
I think as long as citizens understand the risk that they are taking, and I intend personally to make sure that they do, then I think it is acceptable. They will not be flying on the earlier flights. We want to make sure that it's as safe as we can make it before we recommence that program.
Do you think it's a fair conclusion on the part of the American public to conclude that the accident did not have to happen and that ultimately it was NASA management that failed?
The fault was not with any single person or group, but was NASA's fault. And I include myself as a member of the NASA team. I don't think we should be assigning blame, but we should be assigning people to fix what went wrong and make sure that it doesn't happen again, and we will do that.
With us now for a newsmaker interview is a key member of the Presidential Commission. He is Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize winning physicist from the California Institute of Technology. Welcome, sir. Was this an accident that did not have to happen?
Yes, it was. It was an accident that had many, many warnings that there was something wrong and that it might sooner or later go off. And the warnings were disregarded.
Disregarded out of incompetence, out of a faulty system, out of bad judgment, for what reason?
I had some difficulty with that. I kind of imagine that something like a child that runs in the road and the parent is very upset and says it's very dangerous. And the child comes back and says, but nothing happened. And he runs out on the road again several times, and the parent keeps saying it's dangerous, and nothing happens. If the child's view that nothing happened is a clue that there was nothing going to happen, then that's going to be an accident. You could hear brakes squealing a couple of times. That's leakage and the gas is going through the rings and so forth. But again and again I saw in looking through this statements, this new flight is within our database, which just means nothing happened before. It's about the same as we did before, so it can't be unsafe because it was okay last time. And that is a kind of childish attitude that the mother corresponding to the engineers here,
right,
and the management corresponding to the children. That's the way I look at it, and I don't know what you would say. Sooner or later the child gets run over. Is it an accident? No, it's not an accident.
And yet, your commission, and we just heard Chairman Rogers, your chairman, say we're not here to blame anybody. Why not? Why not? Why is somebody not blamed?
I don't know how to assign blame and whether it does any good. The question is, how do we educate the child? The question is, you could say you blame the child for being a little foolish, but it's very difficult. I tried to figure out why they have this attitude and why they weren't paying attention. I've tried various theories, and I really don't know the ultimate cause.
What's your theory?
Well, there's two theories.
Okay,
A lot of people say to me that there's some kind of an idea in management that the incompetence reaches its level or whatever. But I had another idea, but I don't know whether it's right, and that is that in the beginning, all kinds of exaggerations were made about what this thing can do. It can fly 60 flights, it will only cost so much, it'll be recoverable, and there'll be no real problems. The engineers at the bottom must probably scream, this is my imagination, they're screaming up, no, it can't be this way, it can't be this way. We can only go 10 flights, we haven't got enough equipment to train that many crews a year, so forth and so on. And the people at the top who are talking to Congress don't want to hear this. And so they discourage information from moving up. You see, it was just after they were so successful with Apollo. And in that case, they were doing a project with just a little bit harder than they could do, just a little bit harder, so they could do it. Mm-hmm. And they would solve one problem. No, this is my imagination. I'm imagining. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Somebody would say, how are we going to make a spacesuit? And finally, they got a solution to that. They get excited and tell the others. Fellows are working on some other problem, gets a solution to his problem. And there's a lot of intercommunication because there's excitement and motivation. But when the people
Which is not always necessarily a bad thing, right?
No, not at all. It's what makes it go, and that's why it worked okay with the Apollo. But then when they had this other project, which is, so to speak, impossible from an engineering point of view, it's unrealistic, they don't want to hear what happens. It goes up, and each level in a bureaucracy kind of understands what it's supposed to do. Keep it from the other guys. They don't have to hear it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it because it would be uncomfortable to be going and saying we're going to do 60 flights a year when just that morning they were told that it's impossible. That's the theory. Now, as you know, I'm a professor of physics and not of management and human relations, and so it's very likely not right, but you asked me for my theory.
At one of the hearings, in fact, I think it was the first public hearing, you took a glass of water and dropped a piece of a rubber seal into a glass of water and made the demonstration that cold weather is not necessarily a good thing for a rubber seal. Have you proven, was your theory in the glass been proven correct? Do you think that's really what caused this seal to go bad? It was too cold?
That's one of the possibilities. Certainly was one of the possibilities. It's definite that when the temperature is reduced on the seals the way they were being used in that device, in the shuttle, temperature has a very bad effect. What caused a certain amount of trouble is that O-ring seals, as used in automobiles and so on, are in a position where the space is constant, that the space that they have to doesn't move, and therefore resilience is not vital, and the temperature is not, it's not sensitive to temperature. So everybody thought seals are not sensitive to temperature. But the way this seal was being used, the spacing between the rings and so on would vibrate as the thing blew up with the pressure and would move, and the ring has to follow that. And when it's cold, it can't follow that. So that's definitely a possible contributor. But as we looked into this thing, we found so many other problems associated with the seal design, that there was a kind of putty that could have holes blown into it, There was problems about whether there were all other kinds of difficulties.
I got you. So,
So
it could
that
be a
we
combination
couldn't
of things.
decide exactly what it was, and I won't be able to say that it was solely the temperature, but that certainly was a possibility.
How do you feel about the job your commission did, generally?
I think we did a pretty good job. It turned out to be easier in some respects than we could have imagined. It was easy to find out what happened.
But I was curious, why did Chairman Rogers say at the White House today that it would turn out to be more difficult than he thought it was going to be? What was he talking about?
Well, maybe we had different expectations. It's strange because at the very beginning of this commission meetings, I remember Mr. Rogers saying, well, of course, we may never find out what made the accident occur. And that turned out, that's what I meant was easy.
I see. You know what happened. And
we
you
know
feel
what
good
happened.
about
Now, what was difficult, and I think maybe he's referring to this, was the discovery of these weaknesses inside of NASA and their attitudes. This kind of illogic about safety and so forth, which was so extensive from an organization which had such a reputation in the country that it was hard for us to find it out in a sort of emotional way as to have to come around and say that the Wizard of Oz, which everybody respects, has nothing behind it.
The New York Times...
Almost nothing.
Almost, okay. The New York Times reported this morning that you had a clash with Chairman Rogers over an appendix and also Elizabeth Brackett in her report referred to that passage. What's that all about?
Well, that's terribly exaggerated. It got into the news somehow. I have no control of news. I have no experience with it. At one point, I had written a document which was meant for the other commissioners. I had investigated a number of things, and I was just sending them a note telling them what I'd found. And it wasn't written for publication. Then there was a discussion. The various commissioner members who looked at it said it was pretty good and we ought to just put it in the report. But it wasn't. It was written in a personal style. It wasn't proper for the rest of the report. So since we're going to have appendices, which have a lot of detail, they said, let's put it in an appendix. And I'm very happy with that. But because we had this habit of modifying and trying to keep things short by cutting things down that were repetitious, and there were some things in there that were also in the report, we started to modify this, and I looked at it, and I thought it was nice the way I wrote it, you know. So I asked that it be put in the, since it was in the appendix, and we weren't so worried about space, let's leave it in the appendix without any modification at all. And they said, okay, but look at this sentence isn't written very well. And I agreed definitely. It was only a suggestion that I changed the sentence, and I changed it not because I lost any ideas. I had said the same idea in a careful and much more quiet way earlier on in a paragraph, and there was no need to repeat it. It improved the sentence. It's just typographical. I also made another change where I found a sentence had bad grammar. Nobody knows about that one. There's no stink about that one.
So there's no stink here? There's no stink here at all?
No, sir. There's no problem.
So as far as you're concerned, this was a unanimous report from the commission, and
yes, sir.
You didn't go away with any scars, and neither did Chairman Rogers.
No.
All right. Dr. Feynman, don't go away. We'll be back. Thank you. Charlene?
NASA declined our invitation to send a representative to be on our program tonight. Instead, we hear now from a man who was second in command at NASA until 1984. He is Hans Mark, former deputy administrator at NASA, now chancellor of the University of Texas. He joins us tonight from public station KLRU in Austin. Dr. Mark, what do you think of the commission's conclusions?
Well, I've had a chance to read the report, and I think I agree with what has been said earlier in this program, that it's an excellent job. I would take issue with one major recommendation of the report. Safety in any enterprise has to be a very important and deep concern of the people at the top. You cannot do it by establishing an organization to take care of safety.
That's a recommendation that calls for a special safety panel.
No, it's the recommendation that calls for an associate administrator for safety.
Yes.
If you did that, all the other people who have line responsibility would say that safety is somebody else's job, and I don't have to worry about it. And I think what needs to be done is to make sure that the very top people in NASA understand how important flight safety is.
So you agree with the conclusion, the conclusion that the Commission reached, that there was a real problem at the top. There was faulty decision making.
I agree there is a problem. Yes, I think the problem was one of information flow. I participated in 14 launches of the space shuttle when I was with NASA, and I think somewhere there was a failure in communications, as the report says.
You just heard Dr. Feynman say that people at the top just didn't want to hear this anything that was uncomfortable, that there was.
I don't think that's accurate. I think what happened here is this, that, and this is another point that the report makes where I think one has to be a little careful. You cannot set up a reporting system on paper that is perfect. What you have to make sure is that there's an information flow from the bottom up, but if you try to make that too comprehensive, then the system gets plugged up in paper. What you have to make sure is that the top people ask the right questions of the people who are working the problems at the engineering level.
Well, specifically on this,
I think that if I had to pinpoint a problem, I'm not sure that was done. I'm not sure, for instance, that the higher level management asked the right questions of Morton Thiokol in the weeks before this launch.
Well, when you were at NASA, were you aware that there was an O-ring problem?
When I was there, the answer is yes. I was, in fact, in April of 1984, I ordered an action item, which is a document that says do something. I ordered an action item to do a complete review of the O-ring seal system, and this was after we had the first indications that there might be something wrong with respect to the blow-by. And very unfortunately, that was shortly before I left NASA, and as I read in the report, and I have to confess that this is hard for me to live with, it took 15 months to complete that review, where in my judgment that should have been done very much more rapidly.
Just very briefly, do you have any reason why it took so long?
I was gone by then, so I don't know.
All right, we'll come back. Thank you, Dr. Mark. Jim?
Next, the opinions of a former astronaut. He is Alan Bean, who flew both Apollo and Skylab missions in the late 60s and early 70s. He also helped train crews for the space shuttle. He joins us tonight from Houston. Mr. Bean, does it sound to you like the Commission did a fair and responsible job?
Very much so. I'm particularly glad that it was an organization that wasn't NASA that did it, although I have every confidence that NASA would have found the same causes, the same problems, but NASA's way is a kind of a quiet way, a family way, and I'm very glad that the Commission has brought these facts before the public in a much stronger way, because I think it changes the attitude in NASA about, it makes everyone ask if it was their problem or not, much harder, because this other group is saying it's your problem. And so it makes even me, who left NASA 5 years ago, say, was there something I could have done? And so I'm very happy that the Commission did its work, and I think it did it real well, too.
You heard what Dr. Feynman said, and you heard what Mr. Mark just said, that he suggested the O-ring thing be looked after, and it took 15 months, and it wasn't done. Based on your knowledge of working within NASA on these kinds of things, does that surprise? What's your reaction to hearing that kind of thing?
Well, first, I agree with Hans completely about the fact that there's been a lot of talk about the failure of communications to go from the bottom up. But the reason you pick people to be launch directors and things like that is they're supposed to have a broad understanding so that when things are occurring, they ask the right questions. My question is, you know, why weren't they asking the questions from the top on the way down about the cold weather, about the seals? Certainly they've had briefings. So I agree. I'm not surprised about it, but I do think, I do agree with Hans Mark that it's kind of a two-way street, and people have to ask from the bottom, and they have to be smart enough to ask from the top as a result of other things they've learned.
Does the Commission's recommendation that astronauts be more involved in management decisions make sense to you as a former astronaut?
It makes sense to me now. If someone had said that just before the launch in January, I would have said, oh, I don't know, everything's going great, look at how successful we are. I don't think we need to put any more astronaut input into that launch business because, first of all, one of the things I think that reports don't show, and NASA is an organization that is trying to solve problems all the time. Most of them have to do with improving what they're doing, making the payloads easier to fly, make them compatible with people operating them. A lot of different things are occupying your mind. The senior managers are thinking about a lot of things. So when someone comes forward and says to you, I don't think the seals are working too well, it's not that you've got a bad attitude. You're saying to yourself, well, look, I'm working on about 25 important issues, and I can't work on all of them at once. Which ones are the most important to work on? And I think to kind of go along with Mr. Feynman's observation, I think what occurs is you say to yourself, I've got to know which ones of these problems to concentrate on. I better concentrate on the ones that I don't know about. I don't want to work on the seals. I mean, there's no problem there. Why fix something that isn't broken? So I don't think it's a bad attitude, but I do agree with him it's a wrong attitude. It's an erroneous attitude. Every time we flew in space, I can recall having meetings where we discussed, not the seals, but a lot of other different things. And we'd talk about it, we'd agonize it over it, just as Mr. Feynman said, over it, and then we'd end up flying it, and in the minute it flew, I personally and everybody else would say, boy, that's sure a relief. We don't have to worry about that one anymore, because we had lots of other things we were trying to do. So I think they hit the nail on the head as far as saying we had a flawed thinking process. Not a bad one, it was just skewed off or something.
Yeah. Well, I hear you. Mr. Bean, thank you, and don't go away. Charlene?
We get another view now from another former astronaut and former member of the U.S. Senate. He's Harrison Schmidt, who walked on the moon during the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, and 4 years later was elected senator from New Mexico. Since 1982, he's run his own consulting business in Albuquerque, where he joins us tonight in the studios of public station KNME. Mr. Schmidt, you've been hearing generally the same things all evening about the commission report. Do you have a different view of it?
I don't think I have a generally different view, except on one very important specific that has not been mentioned, and I think it's the lesson that underlies the whole commission report. And that lesson is that when the nation makes a commitment, when an administration and a Congress agree that we are going to achieve a national objective, such as the creation of a space shuttle and a routine access to space, that we provide the resources, the human and financial resources necessary to make sure we can accomplish it at the minimum risk, that we have the testing protocols, that we have the engineering designs, that we have the management team in place that makes it possible to do these things.
Well, what are you saying? I mean, how does that enter in this equation?
Well, that enters because in the early 1970s, when the Nixon administration and the Congress were trying to work out what the resources would be that would be applied to the Space Shuttle program, which, by the way, was what was all that was left of NASA's original proposal for a space station at that time. They, in my opinion then, and in my opinion now, and I think now supported by the Commission, applied far too few resources to ensure that it could be done at a minimum risk and, in fact, could be done at all. Our estimate at the time was that it was a factor of 2 to 4 times underfunded compared to what a comparable program would have cost in the Apollo era.
All right, so how does that affect the two major conclusions, that there was faulty decision-making and that there was an O-ring problem?
Well, one, it affected the management system that NASA had to pick in order to live within those constrained budgets. Instead of having the pyramid structure of Apollo, the management decision-making was dispersed into the centers. Personnel were cut, not only in management but in quality assurance in many respects. A lot more responsibility was given to contractors. The parallel engineering teams that NASA used to have were no longer possible. Things of that nature were done. In addition, the decision had to be made to go with a different kind of launch system, namely a solid rocket booster system, instead of the large, reliable, base technology liquid propellant systems that we were used to using and are still much more reliable, in my opinion, than the solid rocket systems.
So basically what you're saying, that the problem wasn't so much with NASA, but with the politicians who made the decisions about the budgets?
Yes, I think that's where you come down. It was the kind of decisions that were made in those days of the early 1970s that made it impossible to have the level of resources necessary to do what really was going to be an unbelievably complex technological endeavor. To take an object the size of a DC-9 or bigger into space, to fly it back, represented challenges that had never before been faced by humankind, and was going to take resources, I believe, at a level comparable to the Apollo program, given that we had learned a great deal on how to work in space during Apollo.
Have the recommendations that the Commission came up with, do they address that problem as far as you're concerned?
I think their concluding thought does, very clearly, and I commend them for that concluding thought, that they urge the nation to support NASA, and I will interpret support means that when we decide we're going to do something in space, and decide we must, we have no choice, that we are also deciding we're going to apply the resources, human and financial resources, necessary to see that this is accomplished properly.
All right, well, thank you. We'll be back. Jim?
Finally, the views of a U.S. Senator who has been in the forefront of urging changes at NASA. He is Senator Albert Gore, Democrat of Tennessee, a member of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, which oversees the space program. First, Senator, what do you think of the job the Commission did?
I think they've done an outstanding job. Indeed, I think this Commission will set the standard for all future such groups. They did it themselves, they got deeply involved in their work and really turned out a first-rate report. I think the nation should be very grateful to them.
From your point of view, is it over now? Does Congress now have a job to do its own investigation, or what?
No, it's not over now. It's just beginning. They have pointed the way to a solution for several specific problems which led to the shuttle tragedy. But now the work of Congress begins and the work of the administration begins. NASA management has already begun to implement some of the recommended changes, but some difficult choices lie directly ahead about the future of the shuttle program, the space station program, and what new goals we should set in space.
Are you, as a member of the United States Congress, are you willing to share some of the blame that Harrison Schmidt thinks the Congress deserves in underfunding this program in the first place?
Well, I think Jack Schmidt is right about part of that. I think that, as the Commission points out, there were very, very serious management problems at NASA, and NASA should have flagged these concerns. They were clear when you look back at the paper record. This accident should not have happened. But Congress should share in some of the blame in this sense. We were so proud of NASA, and like the country, we just were so impressed with what NASA had accomplished that we failed to ask the difficult questions on a sustained basis that really makes up congressional oversight as it should be conducted.
Is that going to change, Senator?
Oh, I think it has already changed, and from now on,
although the strong support for NASA will continue undiminished, there will be no more hands-off attitude, no more assumptions that NASA can do no wrong. There will be very tough oversight from here on out.
What does that mean? What is that? What does hands, if you're going to put the hands on, what does that mean? What's Congress going to do now that it hadn't done in the past?
Well, for one thing, I think we will insist upon a separate line item breakout of quality control and reliability assurance, and the kind of separate unit to assure safety that the Commission has recommended.
Now, how could the Congress of the United States ensure safety at a particular launch, say?
Well, let me give you, well, we can't do that, nor should we try to do that. But to give you a specific example, we learned just recently that over the last 15 years, NASA has cut its budget for quality control by 71%. We didn't know that at the time it was happening because we didn't have either the tough questions being asked or the budget data from NASA in a form that would enable us to monitor what they were doing about quality control and safety. We didn't feel the need to ask those questions because we felt so strongly that NASA had everything under control.
Do you agree with the Commission's decision to blame a system rather than individuals for this tragedy?
I agree with the Commission's decision to put its focus on the longer term and larger issues that are involved here. I believe that NASA management must follow up on this report by looking at what individuals made these atrocious judgments.